Kristi Dosh, our
Glad to be
all-time
here.
favorite. We've got the best guest talking about the best subject.
Oh,
What could possibly go wrong?
I feel like we always have so much fun. We've never run out of things to talk about, no matter how many times we talk. And thank you to college sports for always giving us new things to talk about, right?
Yeah, everyone out there who's doing their part to keep the headlines coming, we appreciate you immensely. Kristi, super excited to be doing this with you again. I know, the last time we talked, we were kind of dealing with a whole host of questions and comments around what we thought was going to be happening kind of as we were coming in and out of the house settlement. Now we've got a little bit more of an understanding. I know you've been really kind of plugged in and on the consulting side, been working with a lot of, powerful programs and some others as they're trying to work their way through this stuff. We've also been a part of a lot of conversations and different models that are shaping up. I think the hope for today was really just to kind of have more of a working dialogue about what we're seeing going on within the industry, particularly as it relates to kind of the rev sharing, house settlement, components that are coming to light and becoming more and more clear as we get further and further into this. I think there's also a number of still like gray lines out there that people are trying to understand kind of what's within bounds, what's not. And I think just for today, wanting to take some time and dive a little bit deeper into all aspects of it. Uh, we did kind of frame this up as a working session. So audience, kind of same rules apply. If you're out there, feel free to drop, any kind of question that you have or any even conversation starters that you'd like Kristi or I to get into directly into the Q&A button on your screens, and we'll be sure to cover them off as we get into it. But um, Kristi, first and foremost, how's it going? How are you?
It's going good. I just got back from Vegas for the second time this summer
Ah,
after NACTA, and then went out for a concert and a little NBA Summer League action and saw
there you
some
go.
sports media friends out there. And the funny thing is, I ran into a friend who does sports talk radio in Memphis, and he only covers the Grizzlies now. So he's totally out of college sports, but used to be like a big college sports guy. And we're standing outside of the Garth Brooks concert waiting to get in. He's like, okay, like in 30 seconds, tell me what's going on in college sports right now. And I was like, can't even begin to. No. And so I was telling, he's seen some of the headlines, but I was digging in more with him on what revenue sharing might look like and like logos on the field and, all sorts of interesting things
Yeah.
happening. And he was like, I got to sit down and read some stuff. Like he couldn't believe all the stuff that's changed and what's going on. So it continues to be a fun thing to cover because there's something new every day.
Big 12 brought to you by State Farm.
Exactly.
You know, I'm excited for when the referees are going to be decked out in, like the Jake from State Farm outfit. They'll be in khakis and red shirts, throwing yellow flags. That's
My husband last night, he was like, is college football just turning into NASCAR? I was like, a little, maybe.
yeah, yeah. You joke, but like the helmets are going to have instead of the Buckeyes are just going to have a bunch of little
Yeah.
stickers of different companies. Um, Well, super excited to have you here. I will say there's a lot to cover. Maybe just kind of jumping right into it. The house settlement. I know you've had the chance to interview kind of both sides of the plaintiffs and then the NCAA. Um, we're coming to a point now where we're expecting a long form kind of version of the settlement. It seems like there's some delays coming out there. What it like from your side, from your perspective, like where are you seeing kind of the next steps with the house settlement and what we can kind of expect moving forward?
Yeah, the news we saw yesterday was that the long form settlement did not get filed yesterday, as had sort of been expected. That was not a deadline. It's not like they missed a court deadline, but that was sort of when they had expected to have it ready. Of course, the plaintiffs' attorneys are blaming the NCAA and saying that they're holding things up. Based on the conversations I had with the attorneys from both sides the day the settlement was originally announced in early June, there were still a lot of questions. I had like a whole list of things I wanted to ask them about in terms of how this would play out and how it would ultimately work. And for a lot of it, they said, we don't know yet. That's going to be worked out in the long-term settlement. And so, not to like defend the NCAA here, they don't need me to do that, but just to say that I am not surprised that the long form isn't ready. They asked for permission to have it be longer than a normal long form settlement would be, which would be 25 pages. Like, I can't even begin to imagine that it fits in 25 pages.
Yeah,
It for sure is going to be longer than that. But
sure.
there were a lot of things to consider and little details. I mean, we sort of all know what the big picture looks like for the back pay and for the potential revenue sharing figures going forward, but there was a lot of little stuff in there to figure out. And, I think that's difficult for athletic departments because every athletic department that I know, at least, at the Division I FBS playing level, is already trying to figure out what their strategy is going to be and how they're going to need to rework budgets if this does indeed become a reality for the 2025 school year. And so you're having to make decisions based on like media reports of what this settlement agreement looks like. And I know I'm consulting with a couple of schools where I just went back today and was updating something I wrote a month ago. And we have a little more detail than we had a month ago. But again, schools are having to make decisions and sort of build out plans kind of based on big picture ideas that we know without having all those little details. But you can't wait either. It's not like you can say, okay, we'll just wait for the long form settlement, because then you're going to get caught flat-footed next summer and you've already got recruits asking you about it. I was just talking to a coach yesterday who was saying, you've already got recruits who will be coming in for fall of 2025 and they want to know right now what their financial package is going to look like. And I don't think you can give them a straight answer on that right now.
It seems like there's more and more questions by the day, with fewer and fewer answers coming out of it. I think obviously the long form settlement will certainly help us to gain some additional clarity there. As far as kind of to the point about the athletic departments, as they're trying to figure out how to operationalize some of this stuff, what are you seeing? Is it still kind of just, hey, we're gonna wait and kind of hold our breath until we get a sense of what's actually going to come out the other side of this house settlement? Or are you seeing folks that are actually taking more proactive steps to try to get ahead of this?
Yeah, I would say a huge number of the Power Five institutions have come out publicly, or I know privately, have already decided that they are going to fund it to whatever the max is, which we think is going to be somewhere between 21 and $22 million. And so they're already making these public commitments. Some of that they're making because they want to get their fans ready for the asks they're going to have
Sure.
monetarily. They're getting, there's a recruiting advantage to saying that, yes, we are going to fully fund this. We are going to go all in. So you had some schools leap out with that early on. And then I think when you get into the group of five, they're trying to figure out at what level are we going to participate? I would say most do plan to participate at some level, but what is that number? What can you make fit in your budget? And how are you going to start
Sure.
shifting things around? I mean, when we were at NACDA, I went and spoke for SEFMA, and there was a lot of concern in the room about what facilities projects look like going forward, and even the fate of facility projects that are already in the works. And is money going to get taken from that to fund revenue sharing? That seemed to be one of the areas people thought money would get sucked out of first. But
Sure.
you also have athletic directors and other folks I've seen out there who are looking for creative ways to increase revenue through, new licensing endeavors, through co-branded type merchandise with their student athletes and co-branded campaigns with them. And so, I think everybody is figuring out that budget piece right now. And you've got some schools jumping out saying, we are not going to cut any sports. It is going to look exactly like it looks now. You have some saying, we're going to keep the same number of sports, but the funding is going to look different for some of them. And that obviously scares coaches of some of those Olympic sports that might be either cut or have their budgets reduced. So I would say the schools I'm working with right now, they're trying to figure out, what does that budget look like? What can we afford to commit to in terms of how all in we're going to be on revenue sharing? And then I would say the other big piece, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, is what does the relationship between our foundation and our collective look like going forward? And we've already seen Nebraska and LSU in the past
Well,
week enter agreements, formal contracts between their foundations and their collectives to sort of formalize that partnership. And so it's funny because when the House settlement was first announced, I felt like I saw a lot of people on Twitter being like, that's it. That's the end of collectives.
yeah.
No, it is not the end of collectives. In fact, I think they're more important than ever.
Yeah. Have you started hearing more about like the agency model? That's one that we're starting to see pop up more and more often. And in all intents and purposes, the agencies are, serving in the same kind of roles that collectives were serving in. I think maybe with a slight bend towards, hey, how do we truly create incrementality within the NI, like the true NIL world of subscription type of revenue streams, or trying to create businesses within athletes. um has that something that's has that been something that's kind of hit your radar as becoming a trend within the industry?
Yeah, between the schools I've been consulting with and then conversations I had at NACDA last month, there does seem to be a real move towards having that sort of outside agency where you're funneling some of the money. Right now, in most states, Virginia being the major exception, there are no direct payments to athletes. And there have been some schools who've tried to figure out, like, can we take the NIL money in through our foundation so that we can give priority points? And what I mentioned a minute ago with Nebraska and LSU, if you guys haven't seen that yet, those formalized partnerships are sort of aiming to solve this problem. But a lot of the schools I spoke with were having their foundation reach out to donors, and like their foundation is doing the legwork of raising the money for NIL. But in most cases, they are then sending the donor to the collective to make the payment. The foundation itself is not taking any of the money in for Title IX and other reasons. But they're the ones having the conversations with the donors, and then they're saying, okay, now go over here and pay the collective. Well, one shift we've seen, I'd say, in just the last 6 to 9 months has been athletic departments saying, wait a second, could we take in NIL money directly ourselves, and then we could pay an outside agency, whether that's a collective or a different third party, serving as a marketing agent, and we pay them as a marketing agent to find these deals for our athletes. And so I think you're increasingly seeing that. In fact, there's a couple of schools that have already changed the language on their website to reflect that that's what they're doing, and that allows them to give priority points for NIL giving and still direct that money towards NIL efforts. And so I would say one thing I'm seeing in the collective space, and I know you talk to collectives as much or more than I do, Thomas, so I'm interested to hear if you're seeing this too, but I'm seeing them either bring in new employees who have more of that marketing sort of background, who maybe haven't even been in college athletics, but have
Yeah.
that bigger marketing background, or they're affiliating with or hiring a marketing agency, because collectives didn't set themselves up necessarily to be, some of them
Right.
did, but a lot of them did not set themselves up to be a marketing agency. And now they're realizing that that's what schools need them to be. And so I think we're seeing some shifts there.
Yeah, I think at some of the bigger programs and the bigger announcements you probably already seen or will continue to see are to that model. Like, hey, how do we set ourselves up to with folks that are true revenue creators, not necessarily fundraisers, not necessarily like, hey, administrators of different kinds of things, but like, hey, these guys have experience in creating long form, short form, text, video content, and packaging it up in ways that allows for it to be consumed and consumable for a reasonable price that you can get. It's funny, we were talking to one of our customers who said, hey, they were asking us like, what is the average kind of subscriber base for a collective? Who's the best, who's the worst, and obviously, you can probably find all that stuff just by doing a couple of Google searches. But what's the standard kind of like high watermark for number of members, subscribers? And we said probably somewhere between 7 to 15,000 is probably where the top tier folks are at. um their goal is to have 200,000. That's kind of where folks are starting to
Yeah.
position themselves is, hey, how do we go and kind of change the model in a way that allows us to plug into, hey, that program has over 80,000 season ticket holders for football alone, not to mention probably another 40,000 folks that are buying season tickets to any number of other sports that they've got. Hey, how do we connect in with that group? And are there ways to even say, hey, if you're buying a season ticket package, a portion of that is going to go towards giving you access to all this unique and special content,
Yeah.
and you can create kind of these user experiences between the athletic department and the agency to kind of join together and coalesce into a much better
Yeah.
holistic fan experience, and providing more and more to your fans, which is meaningful, especially when you get into some of these programs that the fans are just diehard. Like
Yeah.
they really it's like, you know, football, God, family. Like it's
Mhm.
it's a thing when you
Yeah.
get onto some of these campuses. So if there's ways to provide really meaningful content and ways for fans to engage, I think it's becoming the new kind of norm for where these
Well,
things are going.
and I think that what collectives and these third party agencies can do for athletes, there's a
Oh,
lot of value there because not every athlete
it's
is going to have
huge.
an agent. So they're not going to have their own agent who's out there sourcing deals for them, but they might still be an athlete who's marketable enough that the collective or the
Fair
agency is doing
question.
that. And
Well,
something I
hey,
thought
if
about,
you're
oh, go ahead. Mhm.
no, no, sorry. If you're a student athlete and you're walking onto a campus and hey, we want to put you as a star on our, mini series, like we want to do a mini series that specifically is your story. Like that's meaningful
Yeah.
for a young man or woman who's like thinking about what school they want to go to and
Yeah.
what they're going to get. Like, hey, these guys can create a brand for me. And that for some kids that's maybe more important than the rev share dollars or the
Yeah.
NIL opportunity. It's if you can make me a brand, that means a whole heck of a lot. Sorry, I didn't
Well,
mean to
and
say.
no, I was just saying, not to get on like a whole nother tangent. I will preface this by saying, although I'm a lawyer, I am not an immigration attorney, but I'm fascinated by the international athlete aspect of NIL. And one thing that collectives and these third party agencies can do, and some of them have been doing, is set up these deals for international athletes because they don't have the same opportunities. They can't work on US soil. They can't complete the same type of NIL deals that their teammates do. But you know what? A collective can pay to fly them out of the country and get them in another country where they can do these deals. And, we saw with Oscar Jibwe when he was at Kentucky, the collective and his agent worked together and arranged some things for when they were going to be in the Bahamas for a tournament anyway. And not only did they shoot brand deals that they had already signed, but they shot a bunch of stock footage and video that they could sell to brands after the fact. And I think that we're just starting to see collectives and third party agencies sort of dip their toe into that. And for some schools, it's going to be more important than others, especially if you've got a marquee athlete who's international in one of your big eyeball sports like men's basketball or football. And collectives and third party agencies have the bandwidth and the ability to put together deals for them and get them out of the country where they can do these deals safely and legally and still get that same NIL benefit that all their teammates are getting.
Yeah, I think as we get deeper into this, and there's a whole bunch of operational kind of questions, Kristi, I wanted to dive into. I think that's really where we're starting to see kind of more and more color come into focus. Like we've got the black lines that we're going to be trying to paint within. Um, it is interesting and exciting to see, I'm sure, again, with the number of schools that you're consulting with and obviously who we're talking to, like getting more and more clarity on how do you structure a contract with an athlete as an athletic department? How do you manage rosters across, within a cap? How do you think
Yeah.
about, creating a front office, all of those types of things, all things that we do want to talk about. We did get one question just to pop in here, so we'll hit that one real
Yeah.
quick. But of the models where foundations raise the dollars and pay marketing agencies, how is that permissible where schools can't pay student athletes directly?
Okay, so the ones I know, and some of them are being more public about it than others, so I'm not going to name any names, but they are taking in the money through the foundation, then they are paying an agency to go find the deals, but they're not directing them. They shouldn't be. With my lawyer hat on, here's the tricky part. The athletic department should not be directing the agency and saying, I need you to go find a deal for this athlete or this, I need you to concentrate on this team. I mean, I think that when you're taking money into the athletic department like that and you're sending that, you're paying for an agency, Title IX would apply. And I know we have a Title IX attorney who's on here, so she can drop in the chat and tell me if I'm way off base. But I do think you have to be careful, and that if the money is coming through the athletic department, then Title IX is going to apply. Now, that doesn't mean that the agency is going to be able to find equal deals for, male versus female athletes. For me, with my legal hat on, I'm not a Title IX attorney, but with my level of knowledge, I would say just that the athletic department and the coaches, administrators, everybody needs to be on the same page about this. The coach cannot be texting the agency separately and telling them we've got to get, X amount of money for this athlete or he's going to leave. Is that happening? 100% it's happening. But for me, with my legal hat on, that is where the issue is if someone from inside athletics is directing that outside agency or collective on what to do.
I mean, like in its simplest form, it's, hey, we're paying an agent, just like we might have, you probably have a local agency that, spins up content for the foundation already today. This is another one of those. Now they just happen to be using those dollars to pay student athletes to create that content to get it out the door. But to your point, Kristi, like we all know what's actually happening, but we know kind of at least how it can be structured in a
Yeah.
way that's at least somewhat above
When a
board.
legal case is brought and
Yeah.
they start doing FOIA requests for emails and text messages, remember that Title IX is probably going to apply because the money came in through athletics.
Yeah, precisely. On that point, I mean, when we're talking with athletic departments, basically the big one, oh, do we have a visitor?
Sunny, the German Shepherd, has made an
Let's
appearance.
go. Sorry.
She knows a
Um,
lot about NIL from listening to me talk about it all day.
I think the last time we spoke, my son crashed our party.
Yeah,
So
I know.
nice. We're even. When we're talking with athletic departments, it seems to me the risks and liabilities that continue to pop up are Title IX, employment status, FOIA, and 501(c)(3) status. Are there any, if you don't mind, can you just like talk to maybe those four? And are there any other ones that you're hearing about as folks are trying to work through how they operationalize this stuff that are tripping people up or maybe need to be looked at a little
Yeah.
more thoroughly?
Yeah, Title IX is obviously a big one, and it's been discussed with regards to NIL activities already. You've got the case out in Oregon that'll be super interesting to see because although they did not name the collective as a party, they did name the collective in the complaint. And so we will see what comes of that case. But when it comes to revenue sharing, I talked to, I think it was 10 different Title IX attorneys for an article I wrote when the House settlement first came out. And it was really divided between attorneys who took a really conservative approach and said Title IX 100% applies and the opportunities need to be equal, across the board equal, including equal dollar amounts. And then Title IX attorneys who told me, no, I don't think that's true. I think it has to be equal opportunities. So if you are going to revenue share with 100 male athletes, you need to revenue share with 100 female athletes, but that the dollar amounts don't have to be the same because revenue sharing is still, this is one of those wait till we see what the long form settlement says. But when I talked to the attorneys about the long form settlement and we talked about what is this revenue we're sharing, the revenue was from broadcast, ticket sales, and just flew right out of my head. Broadcast, ticket sales, and licensing. Sponsor, not licensing, but sponsorships. I knew I wasn't getting
Okay.
that right. Sorry, guys. And it's not donations. We're not sharing donations, not sharing licensing, like licensing of the school's logo, but sharing sponsorship
Sure.
money. So they came up with that 22 million dollar number because it is 22% of the average Power Five revenue in those categories. And so my understanding is the way they're framing it, and we'll see what the final one says, but my understanding from the conversations I had was we are revenue sharing with student athletes in these categories because that is revenue they generate. And so you and I were talking before we went on about does this fall into NIL or does it not? If that's what the final settlement looks like, I think it does. I think the revenue sharing is meant to compensate student athletes for the use of their name, image, and likeness in broadcast. Sorry, guys. Sunny, the German Shepherd,
just
farms
a
and
just
in
a lapdog.
clearing. And my husband's out of town, so I am here with Sunny, the German Shepherd, by myself. And she will tear apart my house if I put her up somewhere. So, Florida, there's a storm every afternoon. So, I do think it's NIL because I think we're compensating them for use of their name, image, and likeness in the broadcasts and that sort of thing. So I still think it falls under that. The problem is when you start paying student athletes directly, this kind of bleeds into our next category outside of Title IX and into employment. a lot of lawyers and commentators have made really good arguments that if you're going to share revenue with athletes and compensate them directly, that now athletes are going to have a really good employment argument if one of these other ongoing employment cases doesn't end up being successful. And I think that's true as well. And I would guess that during the discussions on this long form settlement in the House case, the wording of that settlement is going to be really important. And that's probably part of why it's taking so long, is because the NCAA is going to want to make sure that it doesn't sound like employment and that the words that are used there can't be picked apart in another case to support the employment argument. So a lot of kind of complicated, I think, issues to be handled in that long form settlement. What are some of the other, you brought up Title IX
The
and the
FOIA
employment
FOIA
review.
was one that I've heard of.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion about athletes disclosing their deals to athletic departments, and then if they do, whether or not those are then subject to FOIA requests. I mean, what we've seen so far, as a journalist who's done FOIA requests, is that they're redacting personal information. So it's not like you're getting a copy of, so and so's deal with Nike. It's being redacted out, and I would imagine that that will continue to be the case. FOIA requests as a journalist have always been difficult, and schools don't want to give up info in general if they don't have to. So I think there will continue to be battles on that. And there's court cases every year where ESPN or someone else has to sue a school because they're not coughing up a document that they think should be in the public domain. And as we increasingly have these deals between athletic departments and collectives or third-party agencies, I think those things are all going to be subject to FOIA requests, but there's probably going to continue to be a lot of redacting.
And then the last one I've heard, and this is a little bit more sporadic, but the 501c3 one, particularly when you're dealing with the foundations, the IRS came out probably over a year ago now, basically kind of giving their thoughts on, the tax deductibility of NIL arrangements. I know that's left a couple of foundations kind of at a pause for not wanting to put their tail on the line for moving money across the line to even agencies. How are folks thinking about that or dealing with that question?
It's interesting because I'm sorry, not the NCAA, the IRS put that out last year, but then they have continued to give 501c3 status to collectives.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. The German Shepherd is absolutely losing her mind. She has never done this before when I've been on a call, or I would have done something else with her.
No, you're
And no
totally
one is
good.
home to help me. So,
It
um,
looks like there might
you
be a
know,
little bit of an earthquake going on, but
she keeps crawling under my desk, but she won't stay there. And now she's going to join us. So after the IRS put that out last year, I thought they wouldn't approve any new 501c3 collectives, but that hasn't been the case. I know of 4 off the top of my head who have had their 501c3 status. They've gained it since that letter came out. Now,
sure.
in talking to CPAs about that, they've said, that doesn't mean that that collective is in the clear, as they move into having to report their activities. It doesn't mean that that won't be taken away down the road. And we know that a number of the existing 501c3 collectives have been issued additional questions from the IRS, and a lot have decided to just get rid of that arm of their business because it's too risky. We don't know exactly what the IRS is and is not going to approve of in terms of their activities. And so a lot have decided to just dissolve that part of their business. But I would say that if you are keeping it, I mean, the advice, again, not a CPA, and I know there's a couple who are on here, so if they want to drop stuff in the chat, the advice I've been given by the CPAs I've discussed this with for articles I've been writing has been that all of your money actually shouldn't be going just directly to student athletes, that it should also be supporting your charitable mission, and that of the charities that you're partnering with. And in the beginning, everybody wanted to make sure they were maximizing what they were giving to athletes. So they were giving 80 to 90% to athletes. And that was like, they were advertising it like we hardly have any overhead costs. We're giving all of this money to our athletes. But now I think you've seen some shift and make direct charitable contributions to some of the charities that they're partnering with. So I would say definitely you need to talk to a CPA about that and not take my advice on it. But I do find it
Yeah.
interesting that the IRS has continued to approve brand new 501c3 collectives. So they have not gone away completely.
Maybe shifting gears here for a moment. Again, more kind of operationalizing the new world of college athletics. I have an existential question, and then I have a more operations focused question. One on the existential side, like, is this still NIL? Like, are we in NIL anymore, or are we in like some new pseudo like athlete compensation, world? Um, and then two, kind of on more on the operational side, like front offices. We're starting to see more of these kind of like, hey, we're bringing on a general manager, or hey, we're creating a front office division within our athletic department, or hey, we're actually having our collective or agency serve as kind of the negotiators and the general managers so that they can deal with the agents and the parents and the athletes. What are you seeing in kind of that side of the house of the front office development across campuses? But yeah, sorry. I'll hit you with the existential one first.
Yeah, I think it's really complicated at this point. Everybody's handling it a little bit differently. And I don't know that anyone has the right answer at this point. What's so interesting about this space is that none of us have a playbook for it, and none of us know what is the NCAA going to enforce, what is the IRS going to enforce, what is the federal government going to decide to step in and do. And so you've got some schools and collectives that have been willing to take bigger risks and have been willing to push the envelope further, and you have others that have said we're going to wait and see how other people handle this and whether they get in trouble for it or not. In fact, I have a school I'm consulting with that they kind of want to wait and see what everybody else does because they don't want to be the one that gets made an example out of. So it's been interesting how that's been handled really differently from one school to the next.
Um, we did have another quick one that came in. Can you speak to the impact of potential house settlement and future rev sharing on the different NCAA conferences, sports, athletes, and divisions? And I think maybe this is trying to say, hey, differentiating between Power Four versus group of five to lower
Yeah.
D1 and beyond.
Yeah, actually, I've done some work with a couple of D2 conferences, and my sister-in-law, in the interest of full disclosure, is an assistant commissioner at a D2 conference. So we've had these discussions too, and there's some real concern that the back pay portion of this and the other suits that are out there are going to put the NCAA in a really bad position for Division 2 and Division 3, or even non-football playing Division 1. There are certainly some non-football playing Division 1 schools, or even just outside of the FBS, who are really upset about this settlement. They say that they weren't part of the discussions, that no one consulted them about what this back pay was going to look like. And they're going to end up having to pay into this, or essentially have their money withheld for this, but it's not going to go to any of their former athletes. It's going to go to former Power 5 athletes for the most part. Now, all Division 1 athletes are eligible, but when they do this formula and they decide how much back pay these athletes are getting, the assumption is it is largely going to end up being, Power 5 athletes that get this money. And so we've already seen Houston Christian file. They don't want the settlement approved. Now, I think it's going to take more than one school saying that. And so far, they seem to be the only school interested in filing. We'll see if anybody else does once they see the full settlement. But I think there's some real concern. And I saw some stuff on Twitter this morning where people were sort of talking about all these other cases that are out there. And the NCAA sort of put the House settlement forward at, well, both sides, not just the NCAA, the plaintiffs too. Everyone sort of put this settlement forward as this solves all the problems going forward. If we just
Yeah.
settle this case and we agree to do this back
Yeah.
pay and we do this forward looking revenue share, all our problems are gone. And that's not true. There are so many other cases out there on NIL issues, on employment issues, and they continue to pop up. There have been new ones filed even since the news of the settlement came out. And so this does not solve all the problems. And the NCAA is could be in real financial trouble, not only from having to back pay, but also defending all these other lawsuits. I think I saw this morning the legal fees over the I think it was the last year was what the tweet
Yeah.
had said, was like $61.5 million. And I immediately thought, how does that impact Division 2 and Division 3? Because I went to a Division 3 school. I'm working with a couple of Division 2 conferences. My sister-in-law works in Division 2. And I'm not saying that we should like force Division 1, athletes and programs to fund Division 2 and Division 3, but I do worry about about we're tearing apart the organization that manages all of them, and we're tearing them apart over issues that really only impact Division One, but are going to have the trickle down effect of negatively impacting Division Two and Division Three. So I don't know who else is worried about it, but I worry about it.
Well, and just to on that point, like I went to a D2 school myself, like the pools of funds to go out there and get to offset some of that stuff is just it's a whole lot harder. I mean, they're already living so hand to mouth in many cases with the dollars that they're getting from the NCAA. To have those withheld is going to be a yeah, there's going to be some real strain that folks are going to have to deal with. Sunny agrees too. I feel
Yeah.
it.
No, I would put her in my, I know you guys watching probably, I would put her in her cage, except she gets so upset, she will tear the cage
No,
apart.
dude,
And she's actually already had medication this morning. And as you can see, it is not working. So
no,
I'm
Sunny. We
sorry.
don't want Sunny in
I
a
think
cage. We want
it's
Sunny
for
front and
Sunny.
center. Yeah,
Thunder's
more
so
Sunny the better.
scary. I know.
Um, Athletes. You work with a ton of athletes. I mean, we got to see you interview the Cavender twins in Vegas. Like, what are athletes saying about all of this noise and everything that's going on within this space? I'm sure there's some confusion on their side, but
Yeah.
what are you hearing from them?
Most of them on the revenue sharing side don't completely understand it. So the questions I get are like, well, which athletes are going to get paid? That's obviously
Sure.
the big question. And when you've got female athletes or even male athletes in Olympic sports, they want to know, is there any chance that they're going to get some of it? And I don't know the answer to that. Every school is going to get to decide on that differently. So one school might be paying their softball athletes, one school might not be. And it is going to require a lot of education, not only for college athletes, it's going to require a lot of education for high school athletes who are going to have to make decisions on where they're going. I'm sure, at least based in part on this, if you're a softball athlete, I played softball my whole life. I didn't play in college, but, if I was looking at colleges, want to go, I was only personally willing to move to certain parts of the country. I knew that I wanted to go to law school. I had some, education-based requirements for where I was going to go. But if I was an athlete, it would be ridiculous to say that I wasn't at all going to consider the compensation package. Of course,
Sure.
that's going to play some role in my decision making. And so what I worry about is that the younger athletes and parents who are going to have to be educated enough on this to be able to ask the right questions to aid in their decision making as they move into college. And, right now, nobody's talking to even college athletes about this because schools don't know what it's going to look like. So I get it. There's no reason to really have those conversations with them yet. But they're at least asking me the questions, and I'm sure they're asking the schools the questions too. And it's mostly just, how is this going to work? Am I going to get money? Excuse me, or am I not? And, some of them do know enough to ask more questions about like how it will be taxed. I had a conversation with a CPA recently about this and about how one student athlete in the family getting revenue sharing money and even NIL money, like making a good bit of money, could actually impact their siblings'
Mm,
ability to get financial aid because it's household income. And
yeah.
I will not try to say more than that because I am not a CPA
Yeah.
and I will screw this up. But I remember hearing that and being like, oh God, like I have a younger sibling who went to college 8 years after me, but the fact that an elite athlete in your family could impact the other kids in your family, it's nuts to me. But some athletes and parents are already asking those kind of questions, and unfortunately, I don't think anybody has the answers for them yet.
Yeah, we've certainly been seeing a lot of questions kind of coming through about, hey, is this a rev share dollar? Is this an NIL dollar? Is this an agency? Like, what am I getting paid for? How is it coming? Like, how do I need to talk to, you know, our CPA about it, or how do I tell my parents about this? It's, yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton of education still left to be done for the athletes to help them to at least internalize and understand kind of what the implications of these next wave of changes are.
And there will be a weird tipping point, and again, not my area of specialty, but just like food for thought. There will be a tipping point where like you might be at a disadvantage if you got like a small amount of revenue share. Like that small amount might be just enough to knock you out of your need-based financial aid,
Yeah,
but not enough to make up what you would have gotten from
without
the
question.
need-based aid. And this conversation happened around NIL when it was starting, but I think revenue sharing is going to have it impact more athletes than NIL
Yeah.
alone did.
if you receive $15,000 in rev sharing dollars and that prohibits you from receiving $20,000 in grants, like that's a bad decision
Yeah.
for you. And
And
yeah, I think
who's
there's
going to be educating athletes and parents on this?
yeah,
That the bandwidth athletic departments are going to get asked to have here, in some of the consulting work I've been doing, we've been talking about who might you have to hire. And I'm not talking just like the flashy hires we've been seeing in press
right,
releases
of
where
course.
you hire somebody who's got like salary cap experience at the pro level who's just going to work with your football team. No, like you're going to be getting more phone calls from parents and from agents asking questions, negotiating terms. I think the physical bandwidth it's going to take in athletic departments is going to take some departments by surprise.
I completely agree. I think the operational, and in many ways, like I don't know, we've been a little bit more attuned to it than most, just because we work with so many collectives that have been operationalizing NIL in a way that is as efficient as it can be in most cases, and they really do try to make it as seamless as possible for the athletes. The school in many cases like times that by five. You're going from a collective serving 50 to 100 athletes and paying out $4 to $5 million. You're going to go to 500 to 700 athletes paying out 20 some $1 million.
Yes.
Like that comes with a cost associated with it
Yeah.
on the operational burden side that, yeah, I think is going to hit a lot of folks by surprise.
Well, and I had people even at NACTA say to me, no, it's not going to be like that. We're going to have one set contract. That's the contract every athlete's going to have to sign to get revenue share. We're not going to individually negotiate deals. I do not believe that for a minute
Yeah.
because
Right.
you are going to have some superstar whose agent is going to come in and you are going to want that athlete so bad and they're going to make demands and want changes to that contract. And it is just going to start happening more and more. I 100% believe you're going to have a contract you start with, but that you are going to individually negotiate, not with every single athlete in your department, but you are going to individually negotiate with some of your athletes. And like who on your staff has that knowledge, who knows how to do that or has that experience? For a lot of staffs, there isn't that person right now, but you're going to need that person. And I can only imagine that University General Counsel are miserable at the idea that this is coming because they're going to need to be
Those,
involved, I'm sure, in a lot of those conversations as well. And I don't think they're looking forward to it.
yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a whole host of, yeah, administrative burden that's going to be coming into folks' lives that they're not, yeah, excited about. Um, I just had two other quick, kind of more tactical ones. MMR partners. We've started to hear more and more as we're getting into these discussions of, hey, we're going to have our MMR partner defer a portion of their, annual commitment to us to student athletes, and we'll actually, write down our annual commitment so that they can make that happen. Like, are you seeing things like that take place across the campuses that you're working with? And then, from an operational perspective, like, do you suspect that would be in the cap, outside of the cap? How seamless or difficult is it for those kinds of relationships to exist?
I've heard a lot of those conversations, and I've had conversations with Learfield about how they're getting involved and the ways they're trying to help create new revenue streams, not only for athletic departments, but for the athletes as well. I think you're going to see more and more co-branded sort of deals. You're going to see athletes and athletic departments working together with sponsors and athletes getting a good chunk of that. I think it's a good question as to whether, like, if you've got an athlete and you and your Learfield or whoever your partner is help pull together a deal that pays the athlete $50,000, are you going to credit that against what you would have revenue shared with them? And I think some of that is going to depend on what this final, I know I keep saying this, but I do think some of it's going to depend on the wording of this final agreement and which revenue categories we're considering revenue sharing and then which ones are technically not, and how that can impact the employment discussion. So I think it's more complicated and there's not an easy answer for it. But I think certainly schools are going to be looking for not only ways to generate more revenue for themselves and for the athletes, but also ways to do it that that help with that revenue sharing expense. You know, they're not going to want to revenue share the max amount plus create all these new opportunities on top of it. So, you know, I've heard athletic directors, I heard a couple at NACTA up on the stage be like, well, you know, this, and this, we're going to count against revenue sharing, including things like Alston payments.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, pending what the final settlement
Yeah.
agreement says. I mean, what if the final settlement agreement comes out and one of the things they've agreed to is that Alston payments do not count towards revenue sharing? It could say that.
Right.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know either, because I asked questions about it when I was interviewing the attorneys a month ago. And that was one of the many things I think they are sort of working out. So there's only so much planning
I
we
think
can
we
do.
can caveat this entire webinar with the, hey, we don't know what's in the actual house settlement just yet, but you know, based on assumptions and based on what we've kind of heard, I think that's yeah, probably not too far fetched. The last one I had, and again, just kind of more tactical in nature, contracts. Yeah, we've started to hear from schools about the contracts that they're starting to at least kind of put pen to paper with, as they're thinking about what they're going to present to their student athletes with the rev share agreements, that are going to be coming. How have those been looking to you? Are there any kind of interesting clauses, anything, you know, from a language perspective that you're seeing that's, you know, at least noteworthy for us as we're thinking through it?
Yeah, I would say I haven't seen like an actual written contract from anybody yet. I don't think anyone's that far along, but I have heard people spitballing what should be in the
Yeah.
contract. I've seen clawbacks where if you transfer a certain amount of it, it either they're probably going to pay it out in such a way that you haven't received part of your payment, or you get it, you know, at the end of the season, end of the school year. If you decide to transfer, you might then, by the terms of the contract, forfeit a percentage. I wouldn't think it would be all of it. The discussions I've heard
Sure.
have been a percentage of your revenue share. I've seen discussions about like, could you put a right of first refusal in there that if another school makes them a better offer, you have the right
Interesting.
to match it? I've seen that discussion. I've even seen that discussion in collective contracts. I haven't seen anyone
Yeah.
do it, but I've seen people talk about doing it. I saw right before we got on this webinar, I saw somebody tweet that some of the collectives are now issuing fines to athletes for things like missing class, missing practices. If the collectives are putting that in their contract, it would not at all surprise me to see something like that in the contract from the athletic department. I had already heard, I talked to a couple of athletic departments at NACTA, and they were planning on putting some sort of clause in there, pending their attorney saying it's okay, that you have to fully participate in team activities. And that was going to be their way to ensure football athletes play in bowl games. Because there
Interesting.
were a lot of athletes who opted out last year.
Sure.
That is a problem that has sort of grown every year. And now that they're going to be playing even more games because we're expanding the playoffs, some, you know, expect that maybe there might be more of those kind of holdouts. So I heard a lot of folks discussing what kind of language could we put in there where they have to fully participate in the season. You know, obviously if you get injured, that's a different story. But if you're physically able to play and you choose not to, you might forfeit part of your revenue share. So, you know, schools are going to build in every protection that they can,
Yeah.
because this is all new, not new money they're having to come up with, but they're having to rearrange things. And this is money they haven't had to pay out in the past, and they're going to protect it the best that they can. And with the way that the transfer portal currently is, I would say that's the one where you're going to see people trying some creative solutions.
Yeah.
And I would expect that at some point there's going to be some lawsuits over these contracts that come out. But it'll be really interesting to see how much they differ from one school to the next. And again, that goes back to, I'm always very concerned about the education of younger athletes and parents. I run an NIL group on Facebook just for parents, because a lot of them don't have any experience with things like this. They don't have any experience with influencer marketing. They don't really have any experience reviewing a contract, and they can't all afford to run out and hire an attorney, as much as I would like for them to all do that. And I direct them towards free and cheap legal services as much as I can. You know, these parents are going to be helping their kids choose between schools that maybe have wildly varying terms in their contracts. So, you know, I do worry about the education of these incoming athletes.
Awesome. If you guys don't know, Kristi is actually in the process of writing an NIL book. I think
True.
due to hit shelves in
In this
August?
late spring, early summer. So we're in the final negotiations with the publisher. So I can't say who's publishing it. The last date I heard was that it would be out either right before or right after the 4th of July. We had talked about May at one point, but now I think we're talking July. But they are accelerating it. For those of you who know anything about publishing, normally if you got a book deal right now, the book would come out in 2026 because that's how long traditional publishing takes. But they're accelerating it because they think this is such an important and timely topic. And my aim is to educate athletes and parents about NIL. I'm going to have to write a little bit about revenue sharing in there, but I have to turn this book in at the end of August, as in like 45 days from now. And so I'm not going to know everything about revenue sharing when I write this book, unfortunately. So it's going to focus more on traditional sort of NIL, but I'm going to have a chapter at the end kind of looking forward to revenue sharing and some of the things to look out for, because it is really important to me to educate athletes and their parents. And I'm hoping maybe I can convince some of these recruiting directors out there to buy copies of the book to give to their athletes as they come in. But we'll
Oh, we're
see.
talking. Yeah,
Crossed.
no, super excited for it. If you haven't read Kristi stuff, Business of College Sports, it's where we go to for all of the best kind of reporting on the space. And also, you know, Kristi, I know you work on the consulting side with a number of folks that we work very closely with, and the value that you're providing across the entire industry, and certainly within the consulting clients that you have has been enormous. Cannot thank you enough for taking the time again, to kind of talk through this ever-changing landscape, and your insights are invaluable as always.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for putting up with Sunny. I mean, this is like, we weren't supposed to have any rain today, or I would have
No,
given her another pill and she would have been fine. But there's like an enormous
dude,
thunderstorm sitting right on
he
top
is,
of us. And I have a metal roof. It is loud in here.
dude, that was the best part of the entire thing was Sunny coming in. But
Sunny the
thank
GSD.
you,
She's
thank you so
nuts.
much, Kristi. Really appreciate it as always.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks, everybody.